Millennials versus boomers. Which first homeowners had it easier? The age-old generation debate. Who had it easier, right? Is it the boomers with their cheapest chip prices, or are today's youngins, the millennials, are they just too soft and terrible with their money? Let's have a look at this conversation. Generally, what the older generation is going to say is the millennials and Gen Z are just terrible with their money. They've got bad spending habits, got no discipline, they're too soft. The good old, back in my day, we did it tough. Back in my day, we knew the value of $1. Back in my day, we saved, we did what it took to get ahead. Cue the eye roll from Gen Z and millennials. And they're like, yeah, back in your day, you could buy a house for $18,700. Today, you couldn't buy a letterbox in Sydney for $18,700. So who's right, guys? If we look at the numbers, the reality is that when you go across the generations, first home ownership rates are falling, guys. They're falling. Let's take a close look at it. And the best way to do this is you compare, right, across the generations, when they're 25 to 39 years old, what are the home ownership rates? Okay, so boomers, when they were 25 to 39 years old, 66% of boomers owned a property, right? For Gen X, that dropped to 62%. Millennials dropped off to 55%. But Gen Z is where it absolutely drops off a cliff. Now, only 26.3% of Gen Z own a home between the ages of 25 to 39. That's crazy. And here's another crazy stat. Boomers are 3 times more likely at that age to own their properties outright. Outright, guys. No mortgage, freehold. That's crazy. Another common stat that gets thrown around to show, how difficult it is to buy a house today is the income to house price ratio. So let's take a look at it. Back in the 70s, the median income would be $4,100. House prices back then, $18,700. So the income to house price ratio was 4.56. In the 80s, $15,000 was the median income, and house prices shot up to $48,000. So the actual income to house price ratio actually dropped to 3.2. But today, the median income is about $90,000. The median house price nationally across Australia, about $892,000. That's 9.91 times the amount, guys. So yes, home ownership rates have definitely fallen across the generations. And yes, income to house price ratio, it's definitely climbed astronomically to be almost 10 times. But let's look at government grants and incentives. It all started back in 1964. The government dropped $500 on the table to help you get your first home, the Australian dream. That increased in the year 2000. 2000 went up to $7,000. That was put in place by John Howard to offset the introduction of the GST. Then in 2007, Mr. Kevin 07 bumped that bad boy from $7,000 up to $21,000. Today, with all of the government grants and incentives, that now sits at a total of up to $70,000 on the table for first homeowners to help them to get into the market. Also, an interesting stat for you to take into account. In 1990, if you were on a median income, you could afford to buy 50% of houses sold. Today, if you're on a median income, you could only afford 13% of houses sold. But for me, in spite of all of that data and all of that information, my verdict, easier today, guys. It is easier today to buy your first home. Why do I say that? Despite house price increases, right? There's conditions here. If you're committed to buying your first home, you're willing to make changes around your finances and you're committed, right? If you're humble enough to buy what you can afford. Most of the conversation I hear from people talking about it's hard to get into the market, they are looking at properties that they can't afford in suburbs that they can't afford to own them. That's the reality. You may have to jump on a train. Your commute to work might be an hour and a half, 2 hours. Well, that's what it takes, guys. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And then the last one is if you're smart enough to maximize grants and incentives to get into the market to buy your first home. If you're willing to do those 3 things, today it is easier than it has been in the past to get into the market. But if you're not willing to do those things, then you'll never be able to own a property, guys. So all you need to do, right, Get committed, be humble, be smart enough to take advantage of the government's cash.